it's not just a binary discussion about do we want the military or don't we want the military. That's not even
Correct.
really, people can have opinions, but, we have a role as a defense community, that
Correct.
I get beat up sometimes. People say, well, are you for or against the military? I don't even think that's irrelevant. First of all, if we're patriotic, we should always be for it. We have Chamorro men and women that are serving throughout the world and have served for generations, especially our community that has experienced occupation, right? A violent occupation.
Yes.
At the same time, you have to be in the room to try and shape and inform decision makers about what really is important.
Day, it's your innovation coach, Rob Jackson, and welcome to another edition of the Innovate Guam podcast. The podcast where we look at all things innovation, technology, and improvement related to the island of Guam. Like, subscribe, and follow me on YouTube, Facebook, IG, and Substack. My podcasts drop at the beginning of each week. Also, look for my Innovate column in the Pacific Daily News, first and third Fridays of each month. All right, our guest today is no stranger to the Innovate Guam podcast. He is the 10th elected Lieutenant Governor of Guam, serving alongside Governor Leon Guerrero since January of 2019. As I said, he was a previous guest on the podcast. He's played a critical leadership role in advancing public policy, innovation, and inclusive economic development across the island. We have the honor and privilege of having him back on the Innovate Guam podcast to provide our audience a recap from last week's first ever Guam Defense Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome a great leader and public servant, the Honorable Josh Tenorio, Lieutenant Governor of Guam. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Half a day, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. Welcome back to the Innovate Guam podcast.
Thanks for having me. I had a good time the last time we were on together.
Well, awesome. Normally we start with some icebreaker questions, but you've been through that. We know where your head is at in terms of innovation. So we're skipping past that right into the meat of our discussion. And I kind of want to start off with kind of the governor's intent and strategic communications. You know, it seemed like she really had a goal. And what was her goal and purpose in convening this Guam Defense Forum that happened last week? You know, what was our main goals and why now? Why did she think it was important to do it now?
Well, I think it is a critical time, as we all know. And, it's not our choice to be in the crossroad or the crosshair of the geopolitics. It just is a reality. And it's been a longstanding reality that Guam's strategic location is great for economic development, but also it makes itself very relevant when it comes to the security, not only of this region, but quite frankly, the entire world. And I think that our goal was to bring to the people of Guam and to government leaders and to folks that are that are being tapped to participate in this expansion of military operations and missions, to bring to them firsthand exactly what the vision is coming in from the military. I think that we don't often get to hear directly on Guam, about Guam, from the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command. And I think that it was very, very important that Admiral Paparo come in to talk about what is in store for us, but also to demonstrate and vocalize a commitment to Guam, recognizing that this is a rather dynamic situation where multiple military services and departments within the Department of War are wanting to utilize Guam to advance the nation's security, but also that the people of Guam are very important in this whole equation. and the quality of their lives, their security is very important also. I think it was very important for us to listen and hear a very public commitment towards the defense of Guam, in addition to the utilization of Guam as part of the entire defense infrastructure.
Yeah, it was really great that you said all of that because it really felt that the governor and Admiral Paparo really had an intentional kind of focus with the agenda and the topics, as well as a strategic intent on communicating to folks. And you talked about kind of the rising geopolitical uh, issues and realities. uh, can you talk a little bit about that? I'm assuming you're talking about things like the so-called Davidson window. You talk about that a little
Sure.
bit?
So, first of all, both the governor and I, and many of the people of Guam, we come from a heritage where our island has been invaded and occupied by an enemy of democracy in the past. And although, people have different opinions about what militarization means, I mean, there's different shades of it. In the past, we've seen, the creation and establishment of Guam's middle class because there used to be a ship repair facility or a naval supply depot, and those were stable revenues for the government of Guam to operate and to establish itself, right? But on the other hand,
Mhm.
we also have people that have fears about being on the forefront of this, that don't like to hear that there are missiles being called Guam killers from, from the competitors of our country, nor do we must also recognize that a good portion of the population believes that this additional military investment just puts a bigger target on us. Those are all valid opinions, but the reality is that, kind of what I said earlier, our geography doesn't change. Guam's
Mm,
geography doesn't change. And
mm,
it's a double-edged sword, as I kind of said when I addressed the forum last week. It allows us to develop and innovate, and have a much more mature economy than most, but it also means that it is looked upon and desired by the great powers to advance their own agendas. And that is kind of where we find ourselves, where we have to be able to reconcile public sentiment. But as the leaders of Guam right now, I think the biggest important thing is getting a commitment from the United States that there's going to be a forever defense of Guam, that we're not going to see what we saw in 1941, where most of the military and their dependents were evacuated out of Guam, and the people of Guam
mm.
were left almost defenseless when there was a great power struggle that occurred and World War II came to our shores. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. And one way, of course, and the United States mission is to deter that from happening. And we have to kind of reconcile and recognize that a key part of the deterrence is all of the planned military missions and capacity and logistics supporting role that Guam plays in that deterrence mission.
Innovation leaders, it's your innovation coach, Rob Jackson here. Are you ready to elevate your vehicle fleet operations? Fleet Solutions is an AI-enabled fleet management system. Fleet Solutions provides real-time video, smart analytics, and total efficiency. Keep your people safe and keep your business moving forward faster than ever before. Fleet Solutions, arriving tomorrow, today. Visit thefleetsolutions.net or call 671-988-9748 to schedule your personalized demo and revolutionize your fleet operations today. So, in terms of the goals, the objectives, and the strategic intent of last week's Guam Defense Forum, do you think you all hit the mark? Do you think that in terms of what you, the governor, and Admiral Paparo had in mind, that you really hit the mark?
I think that I would say that we are hitting the mark in that direction. I don't consider this one and done and this is complete, right? There's a lot of education that we need to do to kind of answer the questions of why is this happening for our people. People, see the expansion that's happening. They see the large, unprecedented amounts in military construction projects being awarded. But the why, I think, is still not really understood. They recognize that there is a threat. I mean, the president, all presidents of our country have talked about this emerging competition with the Chinese Communist Party, but they don't. It's hard for people to understand how that really relates to what's happening. Those are big 40,000 feet in the air pictures, right? And I think part of the
Yeah.
Defense Forum was hearing directly from the leadership and the quote unquote powers that be, that there is a significant threat happening in this part of the region, and what role Guam plays. I mean, when we think about it and look at our past, we can see that, Guam has had sort of the same role at different times. After World War II, when the people of Guam were liberated, there was a vast military expansion that occurred to end that World War the following year. During the Korean era, during the Vietnam era, there was expanded troops here, so to speak, and a whole bunch of activities supporting the logistics for the war fronts in this part of the world. So, like our parents, our grandparents' generation have seen this before, but now there's a new generation that is living on the island. And these conflicts have been so distant in our memories that we have to confront again what our reality is. And the reality is that we're living in a contested part of the world, and that our island, our small island, plays a big role in maintaining world order.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, help me out here. I've got a dumb question. I've been a Guamanian here for 6 years, right? So, why is it that words this deep in it? It seems like discussion about the current military buildup has been really going on since 2004, or maybe even earlier, depending on where you draw the line in the sand. I can't believe that this is the first time that people have, so to speak, heard from the horse's mouth about why this is happening and what's going on behind it. Why is it this seems like it's new?
Well, 2004 was a different time. Remember, back in 2004, President George W. Bush, right, was had a different foreign policy when it came to China. At that time, the goal of the United States and the belief of the United States that was through the establishment and expansion of the capital market within China, its rapid development, and its expansion of its own wealth was going to mean that that country would eventually develop, and the free market forces would go in and change, I guess, its outlook in terms
Right.
of the China of 2004 isn't the China of 2025. Right, it's a very different situation, right? And there's a rapid industrialization that happened, and many American companies and multinational corporations had a role in that. And the decision
Yes.
to move the Marines out of Okinawa was not tied to the growing or even the forecasted threat that the PRC is in 2025, right?
Yeah, great
It
point.
is it is a different situation. At that time, the Japanese and the United States made an agreement to try and diffuse, Japanese desire for a reduction in forces
Yes.
in Japan. And so, that was the Marine Corps establishment wasn't based on, the current geopolitical landscape that we're seeing now. So I think that's part of it. That's what I mean. Remember, at one point, there was this quick pivot. I kind of would kind of joke with U.S. folks. I'm like, yesterday you were telling us, hey, let's go all in China. Let's establish some wealth. Even in Guam, tourism was, hey, let's go after a China market. That
Yes,
is not the case now, right? I mean, look at
yes,
we just look north to Saipan to see what the change in the political environment has meant to their economy. So things are different for sure. But I think that we also, when we live in communities, we look kind of very insular, right? We're just concerned with what's happening within our own border, so to speak, and sometimes
yes.
we don't see the connection that is being made to things that are happening outside of where we're living. So I think it was very necessary for us to kind of confront the reality that we're facing right now.
Yeah, that's a great perspective of Uh, back then, the thought was through free market economic development in China, that was the way that was going to win them over to our side, if you will, and just automatically create political reforms that would follow then the economic reforms. And we see that that's not necessarily true. So
That's
great
right.
for
And
that
I think
perspective,
that,
sir.
the Chinese have a very strong leader. This is the strongest leader of the Chinese Communist Party there has ever been. And if you take a look and start reading about his path to power, which included removing all of his competitors from the board, which included a dramatic expansion of the capabilities of their military, a very aggressive posture in cyberspace and a very aggressive posture in space. I think when we saw the slide from DoD looking at the dramatic growth in
Yes.
capabilities, whether or not you believe that there is nefarious intent there, the reality is the reality that the capability is being dramatically expanded, and you have to recognize that.
Yeah, you can't ignore it. You can't put your head in the sand. You've got to figure out what do I need to do with this and what is the response. So,
Now,
yeah,
that being said, of course, we always want there to be more diplomacy. And, as very and has been very much pointed out, there are very strong commercial and economic ties between these two big countries, right? And having armed conflict is not going to do bode well for either side. So there, of course,
yeah,
has to be another path that we would prefer, but you have to make sure that you have the capabilities to deal with whatever comes our way, because we're not in control of the entire equation, right?
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yes. So let's talk about an underlying theme of the Defense Forum. It seemed like there was an underlying theme of the entire forum that kind of um, was articulated this way. There can be no national security without first human security. So the idea that DO, uh, DOW's um, uh, goals and objectives for Pacific theater and national security objectives were inextricably tied to the people of Guam's needs and requirements, if you will. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I'm going to put myself in the place of Secretary Hegseth, or even better, an average Joe from middle America. Why should the Department of War care about hospitals and schools and roads and water and power on Guam? That doesn't have anything to do with fighting a war. What would you say?
Well, I would say is that the war fighters and their families are living integrated in our community. And even if you were to make the case that even if everybody were to be living on base, which they're not, we all have the same power and water and road system that connects all of us. So we're a very integrated community. There is no segregation between, what is the military is relying on versus the civilian community. It's very integrated here, as it should, because we're an American community. This
Yes.
is not we're not in a military. We're not Guantanamo Bay, right, where there's an enemy of the state that's surrounding your entire military infrastructure. We're a very integrated place. That being said, there's some realities also. The Navy Hospital Guam right now only has a bed capacity that serves 40 beds. The hospital that it replaced, the Vietnam era Naval Hospital, had 1,000 bed capacity, right?
Wow.
So when it was constructed, there was again a different geopolitical situation. And the fact is that military service members and their families rely on the civilian healthcare system for their own maintenance. Not everything can be serviced in the Naval Hospital Guam. And so that's one reality. The second reality is when the United States is operating in an area, it needs to be as stable as possible, meaning that the economy should be stable, the public safety should be stable, the
Right.
surrounding community needs to have not only stability but have vibrance, and be a place that service members want to be stationed. There are assignments throughout the world where there are assignments that are unaccompanied, right?
Yes.
How when those are hardship assignments. After all, service members are growing families, right? The average age of a service member is within that childbearing age, right? So you have to
Yes.
be able to cater to the individual lives of your service members, no matter where. And by the way, bases are operated by civilians, not entirely by uniformed service. In fact, we have civilians that are on military aircraft and military seacraft that are necessary to get the military mission done. So the argument that the governor poses, that we pose, that you have to have human health security in Guam in order for the military's effectiveness to be realized is very true. And I think that's the message, is that we're one community, and we saw the evidence of it during Typhoon Malwar. I think that the communications failure that we experienced was a reality of the rapid digitization of that technology. In
Mm,
2022, when we had Typhoon Pongsonghua, we had 11 cell sites that needed to have power maintained in order for the mobile network to stay up. And of course, at that time, landlines were still dominant, right? So you had that
right.
infrastructure. Now everybody, uses these, right?
Yes.
What was 11 areas for communications to be supported is now hundreds and hundreds. So, as we advance, we also, expand the vulnerabilities. And I think that if you were to go off of the pre-disaster marketing game of the marketing programs of private telecom, which is the most unregulated book of business in the country, you would think, I thought, that we would be more resilient than we actually were, which shows that the government is part of the stabilization of the infrastructure. And it also showed to us that there needs to be a bit more knowledge about what the private sector infrastructure is, so we understand where our vulnerabilities are. And unfortunately, we went through it with Typhoon Mawar, but the silver lining there is that we went through it with Typhoon Mawar, and we understand where the investments in resilience need to be, especially in energy.
Understood. Understood. Let's circle back to the hospital linkage. It seems like the governor's really planted a flag that there is this link between the military buildup and her vision of building a new hospital over on the east side of the island. Can you talk to that a little bit more?
Sure. So, I think that when we look back in history, the federal government played an oversized role in the acquisition of the current Guam Memorial Hospital, which used to be a private a facility owned by the Archdiocese of Agana, that the United States federal government gave the government of Guam money to acquire in order to expand and at that time to do a modernization of the hospital. Now, the first hospital on Hospital Point, which was built by the U.S. military, their infrastructure didn't last very long because when you're right there at the salt spray area of, you
Yes,
understand what can happen to infrastructure, right? So we already kind of went down that road, and we have to examine our past to make sure we avoid or prepare for our future. So the site that the governor has selected in many ways has a lot to do with that experience, but also recognizing where the growth of Guam is going to be and what the facilities need to happen. One of the design values, so to speak, maybe I shouldn't use a value, but one of the missions for that design is to make sure that this hospital can handle mass casualty situations, not only from armed conflict, but from natural disasters that we
natural
face.
disasters. Yeah,
That this hospital is built recognizing that Guam plays a regional role. And that role as a regional stabilizer, not only to the Northern Marianas, but to the freely associated states, is also another business case why the federal government needs to be part of the investment and to minimize any of the indebtedness of the government of the people of Guam in constructing this new hospital. There are underserved or veterans living in the COFA states that are not served that can
yes,
play a role also in the development and the construction of a hospital that has a state-run VA clinic attached to it, right? That which is the business model that we're pursuing. And so there is a major business case why a major federal investment in the establishment and construction of this new public hospital further and advances the national security interests of our government. Our federal government also recognizes the key logistical role that Guam plays in this region.
yes. What about housing? A recent Navy RFP was released, seeking roughly about 1,300 housing units for service members by 2028. And that was kind of really across the island. What's the administration's position on, the location, the community impact, benefits, or concerns about this growing housing for the military in the community, while at the same time, the community has a housing shortage and housing crisis?
The method that the U.S. military is utilizing right now in the acquisition of the housing, I think, is a good one. And that's because getting military construction money through the NDAA in a time that resources are being identified for primary military facilities, right? I think it's the smart way to go. It's the fastest way to go. It's an indication that the U.S. military is thinking outside of the box, but it also provides a pathway for local developers and local construction companies and local people an opportunity to take advantage of this business problem that is occurring, right? And the business problem is that there is an inadequate amount of housing. One, in the big picture, long term, having additional housing options outside that fence prepares Guam for the future because it recognizes that there's going to be a swing, right? I mean, there's in the big picture, there's always going to be a swing in and out of military missions and service members, right? So having
Right.
assets outside the fence, I think, helps in the long-term growth and development. But it also recognizes that the military, the traditional method of acquiring housing is not going to meet the needs of the military. They need to be able to acquire and expand housing in record time. And the
Yes.
faster that they can do that, helps us relieve the burden that this is being placed on the residential home market, which the price of construction and the price of rentals has escalated. The other part of it is, recognizing that the method of compensating military service members with the housing allowance also plays a role. So, it's a little controversial, but the overseas housing allowance that doesn't
Yep.
reward service members for finding better deals versus, other methods where, you have a flat rate and the more affordable deal you can get, the more windfall the service member will get, right? I mean, that plays
Right.
into the market, but um, I think that the military trying to acquire the military housing in a more abbreviated, faster way is part of it. The other part is with us in Guam enabling different methods so that we can expand home construction and home use. And for me, one of those things is, I'm advocating for the elimination of R2 zoning requirements. Let R1 go up to maybe 6 units. I don't really have a problem with population density as long as the wastewater and water systems can support it.
Right.
We can be able to cut time and also, recognize that our community, our island community, we have multi generations in the same household. Why wouldn't you let people have their separate entrances to keep the peace in the family, or provide a pathway for families to start constructing multi-residential units?
Yes.
Maybe mom and dad should be doing a fourplex, knowing that the starter house for their kids and grandkids is going to be part of the same framework and provide rental income in the future for them to expand wealth. Those are all, I think, the opportunities to get out of this big challenge. And, of course, this is a big challenge. We don't want to be Oahu, where Hawaiians are having to move to Las Vegas and Alaska to be able to live. We need to be able to find that right formula where people will continue to stay here on the island.
Yeah. So it sounds like the benefit you see for Guam is that Guam can, so to speak, go to school on the military buildup, and hopefully that primes the pump, buys down the risk so that then Guam can follow that path to then piggyback on it and expand housing opportunities
Right.
for the
In addition
residents
to
of
local
Guam.
efforts, so recently the Guam legislature passed, amended the Chamorro Land Trust Act that allows the ability to pay to be factored in the distribution of residential housing. I think there's opportunities with the Guam Housing Corporation to, get infrastructure into some areas so that those segments of the population can be serviced. We got the low income tax credit, the LITAC program and the local tax rebate programs that we have in place to try and help encourage local development for housing that is going to benefit locals. And the other thing is, all of this also means that the U.S. military needs to continue their part in on-base housing. And you heard some of that already, right? Where
Yes.
Indo-PACOM is forecasting uh, to change density requirements to maybe get into those higher density on-base housing for, the single or childless service members, and then for the residential families, right, having that different path. So all of those are different lines of effort that have to rapidly be undertaken in order for us to kind of change the trajectory of where the housing market is right now.
All right. All right, let's move on to another topic, and that's kind of the participation and civil dialogue aspect of last week's Guam Defense Forum. It seemed like you and the governor intentionally kept registration open and welcome supporters and skeptics alike. Was this intentional to ensure broad public dialogue, and do you think it worked?
I think it was positive for us to keep it open. There are critics of it. People, I've one of my mentors, Dr. Underwood, talked to me and was like, this really isn't a dialogue because there isn't a method that the community really is being engaged, right? Those are all, that's a valid critique. But the reality is that when we're dealing with this very, very complicated issue, there needs to be multiple methods of engaging the public. And in this case, I think it was this structure allowed DoD and GovGuam folks to talk about with each other, in many cases and unrehearsed, some of the challenges and opportunities that are present. So we heard some discourse about responding to emergencies, right? The
Right.
between civilian and military authorities. We talked about some of the new industry that can come up that could help us jumpstart some of the needs for us to expand local employment for higher paying jobs, right? We saw that it's not just a binary discussion about do we want the military or don't we want the military. That's not even
Correct.
really people can have opinions, but we have a role as a defense community, that
Correct.
I get beat up sometimes. People say, well, are you for or against the military? I don't even think that's irrelevant. First of all, if we're patriotic, we should always be for it. We have Chamorro men and women that are serving throughout the world and have served for generations, especially our community that has experienced occupation, right? A violent occupation.
Yes.
At the same time, you have to be in the room to try and shape and inform decision makers about what really is important, making sure that we have reliable, safe drinking water. The current crisis happening up north, in the UP area is a recognition of, what can happen when contaminants get into the water system, right? And we have to make sure that as plans go forward, resources are being placed and invested in locally for things that are here without our invitation, right? So this dieldrin or asbestos, we didn't import this kind of thing. Unfortunately, those were methods of construction at a different time
Right.
and a different, pre-NEPA, right? I mean, these are,
Right.
but at the same time, in 2025, the environmental requirements for military construction and expansion are much different than what happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s, right? There's different
Right.
but so I think the method of was to provide opportunity to share information with us from the military side, but also to be able to confront some of the areas where we are that we're not where we want to be, right? Where
Right.
we don't have $1.5 billion yet to invest in resilient power, but we also heard the innovation from Guam Power. Hey, PS, I don't need that 1.5 billion in one sitting. We can have a programmatic agreement that recognizes what the realities are with construction, and because we're taking this in a different way, then it allows military planners and the funders to say, then this might be a pathway. Um,
Yes.
One of the big calls you heard from the governor and I is we want the Secretary Hegseth to convene the Economic Adjustment Committee, which is a method that the entire federal government will participate in meeting the unmet needs of our community. It was utilized in 2004, or several years actually, not 2004, I think maybe more like 2008, when the Marine Encampment Project was advancing. And we believe that that's the structure that should come into play for GovGuam and the people of Guam in order to help organize and identify the different lines of effort that other federal agencies may be able to provide in order to, number one, make sure that the military mission is on time the way that Admiral Paparo envisions, but also to make sure that we have opportunities for the local government and especially our utility agencies and our transportation agencies to utilize to facilitate the investments that need to be made broadly in the infrastructure.
Okay, that's great. Moving along, great discussion, and it was a great opportunity to hear from the leaders and to engage the community. But what I noticed was there wasn't really any action items taken, right? So coming out of the Guam Defense Forum, what are the real action items, commitments, prototype initiatives, um, or other kind of actions that the administration wants to engage with the military about going into next defense forum? And more importantly, where does that line you up for 2026 defense forum? What do you want to be talking about there so that you're not talking about the same issues there? You're seeing a progress and a forward movement.
Well, the Department of Defense has several lines of effort that we're part of. And there's several lines of effort internally that are helping them reconcile the different interests within the Department of War that is necessary for, the execution of their missions, right? So you heard that they call it the GICSWIG. I forget what
Big
that
swig,
the
yeah,
Guam infrastructure, I mean that there's a senior defense official for Guam that still has to be appointed. And through a partnership with through the Office of Local Defense Communities, the Gov Guam went through a thorough planning phase identifying our critical infrastructure priorities. So, the hospital, the investments in Guam Power, the update of the port's cranes and system, fuel pipelines through the airport. And roads, those are all kind of fully vetted. And that's a roadmap that we believe is required, not only to recognize what the planned missions are, but also areas that are going to help give Guam a jump start in its own economic development, recognizing that it can support not only the growth in military, but be able to be empowered to, focus on tourism, additive manufacturing, and other economic lines that allow us to diversify this economy and really have a high-performing area. So I would say that the forum next year should mark the progress of that. I think that the other reality is that we're in a dynamic situation. So, whatever the military planned 3 years ago, there's some changes and variations that
right.
have been made now. And I think that, understanding and providing the military an opportunity to update the forecast and what is being considered is also a very, very helpful thing, so that we can coordinate and our lines of effort. There was some talk about Polaris, right? I mean, I'm expecting there to be another NEPA program coming down, where the construction of a new submarine wharf at Polaris, which has been talked about, that hasn't even started in terms of its environmental review. And
Right.
then what the planned growth and development is going to be, right? That helps also gives Gov Guam some indications about how we want to use the lands that we have that are bordering that. How can we get into expanded ship repair? How can we get an expanded private sector supports? Or, some of the exciting things we heard, with the additive manufacturing, the 3D printing
Yes.
of parts that are going to be necessary for us to be that more resilient, on our side of and so I think the Defense Forum is going to give us an opportunity to also hear what the refreshed, refined approach of U.S. military is going to be as we continue going forward in these next few years.
I'm excited about that, and I'm hoping that through different mechanisms of communication, office hours, community liaison, some of these other forums that you talk about, between now and next forum, there's this steady flow of communication to the public on the clear action items that are being worked and what's going on, so that when you go into next year's defense forum, it's not like you're talking about the same things. You're talking about where you move from, what you've learned about,
Sure.
and moving forward. And I tell you what, one of the things that's the most exciting is about something I talk about a lot on this forum and in my columns, the idea and need for developing cottage industries, if you will, not just on Guam, but throughout Micronesia, that provides logistics, sustainment, and support services, not just to the forces that are stationed here, but the weapon systems that they use, so that you can build back that middle class that you were talking about with, like when ship repair was here. I really believe that um, there's a great opportunity for a return of ship repair here on Guam, but it's not going to look like what it looked like before. It's not going to be a government run facility with hundreds, if not thousands, of government employees. It's going to look more like a public-private partnership, or a, um, a linkage of um, defense industry, prime subs, and subs, local businesses who are working together in order to get the work done and go after certain kind of contracts and stuff. So that's going to be a different model. So I'm excited about the possibilities about that. And I just want to say thank you, sir, for your time and you and the governor's leadership on the Defense Forum. Are there any parting words that you want to make
Yeah,
sure
I'll
that
close
the
by
people
saying
know?
that at the same time, the federal government, Department of War, the various departments of the federal government have also an opportunity to showcase their response to resolving some of the legacy issues that we have, right? So, when we have, like I mentioned the Eldrin contamination that's been discovered, right? Um, uh, that's a perfect opportunity for US EPA, and I know they're working collaboratively with Guam EPA and Guam Waterworks to be very heavy-handed in the posture to resolve that and to upgrade the infrastructure so that we could remove these kinds of hazards and address them in record time, knowing that we also have to provide supports to the residents that are going through the hardship, right? That's in one area. And then on the other side of it, I think that locally we also have to reconcile some of the longstanding political issues that we have, right? And I think that means that we have leaders that are up to date with what's happening and recognize that the questions that we're asking or needing the federal partnership are going to help improve what we have on Guam, which means that, in my view, um, because we're shouldering this burden of national security on this island, we need to be able to connect the unprecedented opportunities and investment to people's everyday lives, and their lives should improve as a result of all of this additional activity. And the way they do that is for higher paying jobs, for the expansion of the Guam business owner, and the innovation that can be embraced by our workforce, especially our young people. I think those are going to be the things that we need to fight for, and I'm optimistic about them as well. But thanks so much, Rob, for the opportunity to spend time with you.
Awesome. Thank you, sir, for being a returning guest on the Innovate Guam podcast. And thank you for sharing all of your great insights in Guam's path to becoming, a global model for defense support, as well as innovation and resilience. For my audience, I hope you learned something today. Watch for my podcast dropping weekly at the beginning of each week. Follow me on all social media platforms, including Substack. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on all content. And also, please read my Innovate column at the guampdn.com, first and third Fridays of each month. Until next time, see you, and always remember, no matter whether you're at work, at home, or at play, always innovate. Thank you.